Sage Wall is a recent discovery. It was on private property, and these people, it was completely covered with woods and deadfalls and everything.
Was constructed with layers of solid rock, granite, covered with geopolymer concrete. It was a perfect example.
Borton was clearing thick Montana brush on his sustainable homestead in 1996 when he hit something that literally shouldn't exist in the middle of a forest near Whitehall. It was a massive 275-foot-long granite wall, standing 24 feet high, with blocks weighing up to 91 tons, stacked with a precision that defies every local geological rule. Skeptics call it a natural batholith formation, but when you see the bizarre knob features and solstice alignments mentioned on the official Sage Mountain Center site, the just rocks theory starts to feel like a massive stretch. But that moment of stumbling onto it in 1996 wasn't some viral accident. It came from years of deliberate land work by people chasing a totally different dream. Let's check it out. The not-so-sudden discovery. Christopher Borton and Linda Welsh weren't looking for a lost city or a geological anomaly when they pulled their moving truck onto a rugged patch of land near Whitehall, Montana, back in 1989. They were actually chasing a dream of total self-sufficiency and sustainable living, eventually founding what we now know as the Sage Mountain Center. For the first 7 years, the Sage Wall was just a series of odd humps and granite ridges buried under decades of aggressive sagebrush and mountain debris. It wasn't until 1996, during a routine bout of land clearing to expand their homestead, that the brush pulled back to reveal something that looked less like a mountain and more like a fortress. According to the official history documented on the Sage Mountain Center website, that was the real moment of discovery, which makes those viral, brand new find in 2024 headlines you see on TikTok feel pretty ridiculous. When you get up close to this thing, the sheer math of it starts to play tricks on your brain because it's exactly 275 feet long and stands about 24 feet above the current ground level. But here is the thing. Research PDFs available from the owners suggest another 15 feet of this wall might actually be sitting beneath the soil, meaning we're looking at a vertical slab of granite nearly 40 feet tall. The faces of these stones are almost perfectly vertical, and the way they're stacked without a lick of mortar makes you wonder how they've stayed upright through thousands of years of Montana winters. It really makes you sit back and wonder what you'd build your life around if you found something like this on your own land. Especially since Christopher and Linda decided to become its unofficial guardians rather than selling the rights to the highest bidder. Because this site sits entirely on private property, it has avoided the typical fate of ancient-looking sites where people show up with spray paint or hammers to take home a souvenir. The owners have spent the last 30 years implementing strict anti-vandalism rules and only allowing access through guided tours, which is probably why the mainstream scientific world didn't feel the need to rush in until things went viral recently. Christopher isn't merely some random guy who happened to find a wall in his backyard. Local government records show he's been a heavy hitter for solar energy standards across Montana for years. It proves that his entire life revolves around stewardship and the future, which makes his connection to this ancient mystery feel a lot more intentional than just a stroke of luck. You really start to feel that sense of deliberate care when you dig into their alignment research, where they've mapped out specific notches in the granite that appear to track the sun's path with eerie precision. Now, here is where it gets interesting, because while the owners have been quietly documenting these alignments for decades, the internet has only just caught up. The suddenness of the discovery is a total myth created for clicks, ignoring the fact that this couple has been living in the shadow of these 91-ton blocks since the mid-90s. According to an article from 94.5 Max Country, the site is a masterclass in private preservation, showing that sometimes the best way to protect history is to simply live alongside it. Scale alone screams advanced work, but skeptics point to Montana's geology playing tricks. Let's stack up the evidence pro and con. But hold on, those massive blocks look stacked with purpose, until you hear how Montana's ancient geology pulls off the same illusion. Time to weigh both sides. Megalith magic or geological trick? You can't just walk past these 91-ton blocks without your brain trying to make sense of the precision. It's the kind of tight fit that feels way too familiar if you've ever gone down a rabbit hole looking at those massive walls in Peru or Egypt. If you check out the shots from the Maxim news reports, you'll see these bizarre knobs sticking out of the granite that look identical to the structural nubs found at Sacsayhuaman over in the Andes. Seeing that same weird signature thousands of miles away in Montana is exactly why the lost civilization theory starts feeling like a solid lead rather than a wild guess, especially when you start looking at how the whole thing functions as a solstice observatory. If these were just random rocks, why do they seem to align so perfectly with the sun during the year's most important celestial moments? It's enough to make anyone want to throw out the history books right then and there. But here's where the geological reality of Montana starts to push back hard against that excitement. According to a technical breakdown on the Geologic Time YouTube channel, this whole area is part of the boulder batholith, a massive underground plume of magma that cooled 70 million years ago. As that granite cooled and shifted, it naturally cracked into these massive rectangular blocks through a process called jointing. To a geologist, what looks like an intentional wall is actually just a vertical vein of rock that's been exposed while the softer stuff around it eroded. It makes you think twice about every ruined photo you've scrolled past, doesn't it? Because nature has a funny way of mimicking human engineering far better than we usually like to admit. Liev Alberino, a dedicated field investigator for Montana megaliths who frequently posts his on-site analysis to YouTube, points out that the precision we see might just be a trick of the eye. He explains that the fissures and cracks look like masonry joints because the granite naturally breaks along straight planes of weakness. Even those famous knobs that everyone points to as proof of ancient tech might actually be nothing more than weathering patterns or erratics, boulders moved by glaciers that eventually wore down into odd shapes. According to Alberino's field notes, if you look at the lichen and weathering on the wall, it matches the surrounding natural boulders perfectly, suggesting they've all been sitting out in the Montana wind for the same amount of time. Then you have the perspective of the owners who have lived with this thing for 30 years and have a front row seat to the debate. According to their records, at the Sage Mountain Center, those solstice alignments they've tracked aren't just coincidences. They hold up year after year with striking consistency. Yet they're also the first to admit that in 3 decades of living on this homestead, they haven't found a single arrowhead, pottery shard, or copper tool near the wall. No artifacts, no signs of a camp, and no traditional Native American oral histories that link back to a construction project of this scale. It's a silent giant that refuses to leave a paper trail. Even Samir Osmanagic, the controversial figure known for promoting the Bosnian pyramids, has claimed the site dates back before the last ice age, though most mainstream geologists have debunked his involvement as more hype than science. Stuck admiring a fortress that acts like just another mountain ridge, evidence is deadlocked between genius builders and nature's con artistry. But one straightforward test could shatter the stalemate for good, history's game changer. The debate between geological coincidence and ancient engineering usually ends in a screaming match because, let's face it, your eyes can lie to you. You see a perfect 90-degree corner and think masonry, while a geologist sees a natural cleavage plane and thinks granite cooling. We've been stuck in this loop for 30 years, but there is actually a way to settle this without moving a single 91-ton block or digging up the entire Sage Mountain homestead. It's called paleomagnetic testing, and it's basically the ultimate lie detector for rocks. According to a technical deep dive from Cosmos Chronicle, this method works because granite contains tiny magnetic minerals that act like microscopic compass needles. When that rock is molten and starts to cool down millions of years ago, those needles lock into place, pointing exactly toward the Earth's magnetic north as it existed at that very second. Now, here is where it gets really interesting for the Sage Wall. If that wall is just a natural part of the Montana bedrock that formed in place, every single block in that 275-foot stretch should have magnetic needles pointing in the same direction. It's like a synchronized dance troupe. They all cooled at the same time, in the same position, so the magnetic signature is uniform across the whole structure. But if those blocks were quarried, flipped, rotated, or moved by human hands to build a wall, those magnetic signatures are going to be a total mess. One block's north will be pointing at the ground, another will be pointing left, and the next will be upside down. Think about that for a second. We don't need to find a lost copper chisel or an ancient skeleton to prove this was man-made. We just need to see if the magnetic signatures are jumbled. According to the files on the Sage Mountain Center website, Christopher and Linda are actually open to this kind of scientific research. They've spent decades protecting the site from the kind of people who want to come in with heavy machinery, but a paleomagnetic test is incredibly non-invasive. You're talking about taking tiny core samples, basically the size of a pencil, that don't ruin the aesthetic of the wall but hold the keys to the kingdom. Imagine holding that core sample, knowing it could rewrite the maps of human migration and the entire timeline of North America. If those magnetic fields are jumbled, we aren't just looking at a cool rock formation anymore. We're looking at proof of a pre-Clovis civilization that was moving 90-ton blocks in Montana, while the rest of the world was supposedly still figuring out basic pottery. The stakes here are absolutely massive because a man-made verdict would upend every textbook currently sitting in a university library. We've been taught for a century that the first Americans were nomadic hunters who arrived about 13,000 years ago, but a structure of this scale suggests a sedentary, highly organized society that could have been there 10,000 years earlier. But wait, there is a weird silence that makes this even more complicated. According to field reports from ME Stuff on Substack, there is a massive void in the local indigenous oral traditions regarding the Sage Wall. Usually, when you have a monument this big, the local tribes have stories about the old ones or giants who built it. But in this part of Montana, the silence is deafening. It's as if whoever built it, if they built it, predates even the oldest ancestors of the modern tribes. This lack of lore is exactly why the paleomagnetic test is the only way forward. We can't rely on stories that aren't there, and we can't rely on mainstream archaeology, which often ignores private land finds because they don't fit the established Clovis first narrative. But get this, if the test happens in 2026, as proposed, and it shows the blocks were moved, the pressure on the scientific community to acknowledge Sage Wall would be undeniable. One simple drill could literally force the world to look at Montana the same way we look at Giza or Stonehenge. The only real risk isn't the science, it's the hype. If word gets out that this is officially ancient, the owner's 30-year mission of stewardship faces a nightmare of tourists and vandals that no private fence can stop. It really makes you wonder why this hasn't been funded yet. It's a cheap test compared to a standard archaeological dig, but perhaps the implications are just too uncomfortable for the people who have built their entire careers on the current timeline. One way or another, the wall is still standing there, 24 feet high and 275 feet long, mocking our inability to decide what it is. The data demands we drop beliefs and just stare at the facts. Test or no test, why have suppression whispers and viral frenzy buried the real story happening right there on the ground? Controversies and cover-ups? Joe Rogan's podcast clips started flooding the internet in 2024 with headlines claiming a brand new megalithic discovery had just been made in the Montana wilderness. And honestly, it's a perfect example of how the digital world can warp reality. While the buzz made it look like explorers had just stumbled out of the brush with fresh photos last Tuesday, the actual residents of the land, Christopher Borton and Linda Welsh, have been dealing with this 275-foot granite giant since 1996. According to their official warnings at the Sage Mountain Center, this sudden wave of virality has actually become a bit of a nightmare for the site's preservation. They've had to fight a constant battle against AI-generated fakes that make the wall look like a neon-lit temple, and even worse, a surge of trespassers and vandals who think they have a right to the land just because it's famous on the internet. It is a strange situation where the very people who claim to love history are the ones most likely to destroy it by trampling over private property lines just to get a selfie with a 91-ton block. And get this, the hype is so thick that it's actually drowning out the real science that could be happening there. According to field reports from ME Stuff on Substack, the viral distortion has reached a point where people are making up entirely new dates and hidden rooms that simply don't exist, which just gives mainstream geologists more ammunition to dismiss the whole thing as a hoax. When you have influencers claiming there are gold-filled chambers behind the granite without a shred of proof, it makes it incredibly easy for a university professor to roll their eyes and walk away. On the other side of the fence, you have the traditional geological community, as the experts featured on the Geologic Time YouTube channel, who won't even entertain the idea of a man-made origin. They look at the 91-ton blocks and the 70-million-year-old history of the boulder batholith and decide the case is closed before anyone even touches a drill. It's a classic standoff where the truth is stuck in the middle of two extremes, leaving the rest of us wondering if we are looking at a miracle of nature or a miracle of man. Because the Sage Wall sits entirely on private property, it creates this fascinating paradox for archaeology. On one hand, private protection has literally saved the wall from being chipped away for souvenirs or spray painted over the last 30 years. If this were on public forest land, it would likely be covered in graffiti by now, or worse, have chunks missing from people trying to sell ancient Montana stone on eBay. But on the other hand, being private means no major university or state agency can just walk in and start a massive excavation without the owner's permission and funding that doesn't exist yet. It creates this invisible barrier where the site is safe from the public, but also hidden from the rigorous peer-reviewed study it desperately needs. Private protection feels right when you see how other public sites are treated, but at what cost to our collective knowledge? If the owners hadn't been so diligent about their sustainability mission and their solar energy advocacy, this place might have been turned into a gravel pit decades ago. Think about that. A 275-foot potential megalith could have been ground down into road filler because a developer didn't care about weird-looking rocks. Now here is where it gets interesting for the future. Even though no massive pits or trenches are being dug right now, there is huge potential for non-invasive tech like LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar to see just how much of this wall is still buried. We already know from the Sage Mountain Center's research downloads that the wall likely goes at least 15 feet deeper than what we can see on the surface. That is a massive amount of stone hidden beneath the Montana soil. If LiDAR reveals that this 275-foot structure actually connects to other buried formations nearby, forming a perimeter or a foundation, the natural jointing theory is going to have a very hard time explaining a perfectly geometric grid spanning miles. Geologists say the rock cracks naturally, but nature rarely cracks in perfect, interconnected right angles that go on for city blocks. It really makes you wonder if we're only looking at the tip of an ancient iceberg that was built to mirror the very ecosystems Christopher and Linda have spent their lives protecting. Thinking about that for a second, the owner's mission for a sustainable future actually echoes the themes we see in ancient megalithic sites. Building something that lasts essentially forever and works in harmony with the sun and the land. There is a certain irony in the fact that the people who discovered this wall were already dedicated to off-grid living before they even knew what they had. But the uncomfortable truth is that the very hype meant to champion the site might be the thing that ultimately destroys it. When a site goes viral, the pressure to turn it into a tourist trap or a government-regulated park becomes almost unbearable. We've seen it happen all over the world, where discovery leads to the death of the site's soul. For now, the wall remains a private mystery, shielded from the chaos of the internet by a couple who just wanted to live in peace. Verdict pending, but Sage Wall is already cracking open the very foundation of how we think history should be recorded. We are watching a slow-motion collision between digital fame and ancient reality, and honestly, the wall doesn't seem to care about the noise. It has been there for thousands, maybe millions of years, and it is perfectly fine waiting a few more for us to get our act together. Outro. So, what do you think? Is the Sage Wall a masterwork of an unknown ancient society, or is nature just an incredible architect when it has 70 million years to work? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Paleomag test will finally settle this, or will we be debating this wall for another 30 years?